morning, good afternoon, good evening. Zimbabwe is a failed state. I've given many reasons why it is. But without doubt, one of those reasons has to be that we have got an incredibly corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless MDC-CCC opposition. God, the number of times that Zanu PF is outwitted the opposition is simply unbelievable. The notable, the most outstanding example of that was during the GNU. The primary purpose of the GNU was for the opposition to implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. When the MDC was formed in 1999, it was on the understanding that Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends will bring about the democratic changes the country was dying for. They even named their party the Movement for Democratic Change. And yet it is disappointing that 25 years down the line, including the 5 years in the GNU, they failed to implement even one token reform. And that's the reason why Zanu PF has been able to rig elections again and again and again. And after the 2008 to 2013 GNU debacle, they did one other thing. The MDC-CCC leaders abandoned implementing reforms. And they've been participating in flawed elections under the pretext that they can win rigged elections. They've even been conning their own followers to participate in those flawed elections, promising them that this time we have stringent measures to make sure that the opposition win. All lies. It hasn't helped, of course, when you have got ignorant, naive, and gullible supporters who believe anything and everything they are told. But the opposition leaders themselves have proven to be breathtakingly incompetent. Robert Mugabe had no problem during the GNU conning Morgan Tsvangirai, Tendai Biti, Nelson Chamisa, David Coulthard, all the MDC-CCC leaders to do nothing about the reforms during the GNU. He trapped them. He gave them the E-Class Mercedes-Benz ministerial limos for all the MDC deputy ministers, the two deputy prime ministers, and Morgan Tsvangirai himself, followed by very generous salaries and allowances. And for Tsvangirai, the $4 million Highlands mansion. And they forgot about the reforms completely. And this is why we are where we are today. The recent announcement by Zanu PF, this ED 2030 agenda, which has been punctuated by contradiction by Mnangagwa himself, saying, I'm a constitutionalist, I'm not going to violate the constitution, could well be a decoy. They know that you throw this bone to the opposition, they'll snap it up. When in reality, they actually genuinely have no intention. Mnangagwa has no intention of staying on beyond 2028. They just wanted the opposition to snap it up and run with it. Let's hear Tendai Biti telling the nation how he is going to stop this 2030 agenda.
To say 2/3 in the National Assembly and 2/3 in the Senate, it must then go to a referendum, because it is a bill altering term limits in the country. The referendum is a simple process, Baba. The referendum simply asks whether you are saying yes or no. Because we are going to campaign and live in the mountains to get that no vote. There's a second problem. The Constitution then says, when you change this Constitution and you remove the term limits, it doesn't benefit the incumbent. It benefits the next. It benefits the next. But you can change that provision. Same process. Yeah, we call it the Abdoulaye Wade provision. Because President Abdoulaye Wade amended the Constitution for a third time, and Senegalese said, it can't benefit you. And he lost at that stage. And that's why President Sall came in. And as fat as yes, as you know, President Macky Sall also tried to change the Constitution to benefit him. Yet he came through a process of rejecting a third term agenda. That's why you can't trust people. But anyway, to come back to the legal process. Another referendum is required now to change the constitutional provision that says you can't benefit. That's when we will see Trababala's true colors, because all along you'll be saying, I don't want Vandova Akuda. Now when he says, now the Akuda, the constitution has to go to a referendum for the second time. Baba, Pakaipa. Tusangana Makom, Tusangana Wachendabwe, Tusangana Udotito, Tusangana Escotini, Tusangana Binga, Tusangana Choloch. He can't win those referendums. He cannot win those referendums. Okay.
This is very rich. He cannot win those referendums. Are you sure? To start with, there are some people who believe that Zanu PF can extend Mnangagwa's stay in power for the extra 2 years without going to a referendum. All the party has got to do is have Parliament vote with 2/3 majority to change the term limit of the president from 5 years to 7 years. So that from now on, presidents are elected for 7-year term. So in his case, come 2028, they'll be saying, well, he has served 5 years and he's got 2 more years to go. And if Parliament vote for that, 2/3 majority, and the Senate the same thing, that will pass. Let's be honest here. Changing the term of the president, it will not be the first time we've seen that happen. Initially, the president's term was 6 years. And then they changed it. They say, oh, no, we want harmonized elections. And we know why Mugabe wanted harmonized elections, for his own selfish reasons. And so changing it back now to increasing the 5 years, I don't see that as an impossible task. But even if we accept Tendai Biti's argument that they will go for changing the Constitution, amending the Constitution, let's be very clear here. In a referendum, you do not need 2/3 majority. They may decide 50% plus 1 is good enough. And that will stand. Zanu PF has got monopoly, particularly in the rural areas. The party's dominance in the rural areas has nothing to do with what the ordinary people want, as we all know. It's got everything to do with the fact that the party does not allow those people in the rural area. They've been reduced to nothing more than serfs in the medieval time, forever beholden to the landlords. And in this case, here, Zanu PF and their proxies, the chiefs, the headmen, the whole veterans. The party has already bullied its own members to support this ED 2030 agenda, as we saw last year, and we saw again this year's party conference. When the likes of Blessed Geza called the whole ED 2030 bullshit, it was put on the back burner. And Mnangagwa and his cronies went out on a spending spree, bribing all veterans. Some of them, they had houses built for them with boreholes and solar panels. And some had cars bought for them. But the overwhelming majority, all they ever got was a war veteran development fund, which has got very little money in it. So many of them will never get any of it, plus a bicycle. It's laughable that somebody who is 70 years old should find themselves the owner of a new bicycle, particularly if they've never learned how to ride a bicycle. Even if you have, at 70 years old, the last thing you want to do is fall off that bike. So this was a bribe. There's no doubt about it. And with the usual Mnangagwa ruthlessness, he has went on to bribe officials within the Zanu PF, the old structure, and he's also formed his own Zanu PF new structures. there is a lot of these varakashi for ED. The party's old structure has been literally overwhelmed by this varakashi for ED. So he has bribed those people. And he has got the money. I mean, we know that there is wholesale looting in the country right now. And all the money that is being looted is not going to the common good. It's being taken by Mnangagwa and his cronies to bribe and buy blind loyalty. And it is not out of this question that they can have a referendum and they will spend money bribing people, threatening them to make sure that they do have the yes vote. So this whole thing about Tosangana Kumakumu, he will never win this referendum, is, to say the least, far-fetched. But I also want to remind the listeners, the people of Zimbabwe, is that this will not be the first time the opposition has been conned by Zanu PF. You look at the GNU itself, like I said, the primary purpose of the GNU was to implement reforms. Mugabe bribed Tsvangirai and company. They forgot about the reforms. They failed to implement even one token reform. The 2013 new constitution was another case to consider. Zanu PF threw the spanner in the works. The whole process was so messy, it was unreal. But MDC guys stuck to it because your involvement in that constitution-making process was such a lucrative business. They were paid allowances that none of the opposition leaders could even contemplate abandoning the constitution-making process. They stuck to it because they also wanted a share of the generous allowances. In the end, the whole thing was stampeded by Zanu PF. The draft constitution was produced. Before it was even distributed, the people were being called to a referendum. People have not even had a look at the document. But that was all rushed in. And throughout that process, Zanu PF continued to complain about this section, that section, and so forth. And Tendai Biti and company were the one defending that document, telling us it is one of the best constitutions in the world. Morgan Tsvangirai even called it an MDC child. And so we went to the referendum. And Zanu PF saw to it that it passed with flying colors. 94% approved that constitution. You didn't need to be on the voters' roll. All you needed is your national ID. There was plenty of room to rig that process. There would be plenty of room to rig the referendum if there should be a referendum on the amendment of the Constitution. Why somebody thinks Zanu PF could lose it, beggars belief. But to come back to the 2013 Constitution, it was approved. And even with the new approved Constitution, SADC leaders realized that Zimbabwe will never hold free, fair, and credible elections without at least some of the electoral reforms being implemented. And so they suggested that the 2013 elections should be postponed until those reforms are implemented. Tendai Biti and Morgan Tsvangirai were told to their faces, if you go into these elections, you will lose. Did they listen? No. They participated in those flawed elections, and of course they lost. And ever since they've been participating in these flawed elections and losing. And worst of all, they've even been conning people to participate, knowing fully well that Zanu PF was rigging, but they were doing it out of greed. Zanu PF has conned the MDC CCC leaders so many times that only the very naive would want to believe that Zanu PF will not do it again. What is so interesting about this ED 2030 as a decoy is that it has already drawn the opposition to commit themselves to participating, convinced that they will win the referendum. Zanu PF will draw them out, will never put anything specific on how they were going to achieve this ED for 2030. Drag on. It's only 3 years before the next elections now. And say nothing. And then a few weeks before the elections itself, announced that the elections were going ahead. Zanu PF has elected its candidate for the presidential race. And the opposition will be caught flat-footed. They'd been prepared to fight, to take the regime head-on in the referendum. They must be prepared now to take the regime head-on in the 2028 elections. And the worst thing about it is not even one token reform has been implemented so far or is likely to be implemented between now and 2028. So Tendai Biti and company will be participating in those 2028 elections without even one token reform implemented. And as we know, you participate in the flawed elections. You've given Zanu PF legitimacy. So we are back to square one again. What do I propose? What is the way forward? Some people will ask. But the way forward is very clear. ED 2030, we don't know whether it's a decoy or it's a reality. But either way, it doesn't matter. We should make our stance very clear. People should not participate in a flawed electoral process. SADC and the AU, election observers, condemn the 2023 elections as flawed and illegal. If it was not for this destruction, this is what we'll be focusing on. And we'll be making it abundantly clear that participating in 2028 elections is meaningless. We can't keep on participating in flawed elections and then at the end of the day admit the election process was flawed, but we've given Zanu PF legitimacy, so we are helpless. No, we can't keep on doing that. We would be focused on making sure that the Chamisa Chete Chete Brigade members particularly understand that you cannot keep on participating in flawed elections because you give Zanu PF legitimacy. You cannot keep on believing some of these idiotic lies by the likes of Chamisa that I've plugged off the vote rigging loopholes. Hashtag God is in it. Even evokes the name of God. And then the day after the voting is done, he's the first one to admit that Zanu PF rigged the elections. The very thing that he said they will not do because I've plugged the vote rigging loopholes. That is what we'll be focused on. But Zanu PF Mnangagwa do not want us to focus on that. So they throw this decoy. Worst case scenario, I will stay on beyond my 2-term limits, violating the Constitution. And that galvanizes us into believing that we should stop him violating the Constitution, as if winning that battle is all that matters. And then in the end, he doesn't even fight that battle. And we find we've lost the real battle we wanted to win. Stop participating in flawed elections to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. The people of Zimbabwe have got to be a lot smarter. We can't keep on repeating the same mistake. I know in the last few months, there was a battle going on where some people were saying, no, we must support Blessed Geza and his Geza revolution. And others saying the Geza revolution is just the 2017 military coup Mark II. The coup replaced Robert Mugabe with another dictator. We didn't change anything. And the people were wise enough to say, no, we are not going to do that again. Because Geza made it abundantly clear that as far as he's concerned, he wants Mnangagwa to go and be replaced by Chiwenga. Anyone who doesn't know that Chiwenga is corrupt, incompetent, and no different from Mnangagwa must be a visitor from another planet. Why would you want to replace a dictator with another when 2017 you did the same thing? You should surely learn from the past. You can't keep on repeating the same foolish mistakes. I believe the ED 2030, Mnangagwa may try it. If he wins, oh, that's well and good for him. If he loses, he has got plan B. And in plan B, a Zanu PF candidate will win the flawed elections of 2028. And as far as the people are concerned, having a dictator Mnangagwa or having some other Zanu PF dictator and yet still have the Zanu PF dictatorship, I don't think it's anything worth celebrating. What we should be fighting for is to end the dictatorship, not to be conned into participating in a flawed process only to end at the end of the day, yes, remove Mnangagwa, but only to put yet another dictator. We need to be smart. We need to be a lot smarter that we have been shown so far. Zanu PF dictatorship is not that difficult to remove. We have had many golden opportunities to do so. We have failed to do so only because the people we sent to carry out the reforms have let us down. And I think it is high time the people of Zimbabwe woke up to that reality and start showing that you are capable of thinking for yourself. This promise by Tendai Biti that Zanu PF will not win the ED 2030 is nothing. He should promise us that Zanu PF will not win the 2028 elections, because that will end the Zanu PF dictatorship. And if Zanu PF does not win the 2028 elections, whether Mnangagwa tries to stay on beyond 2028 is irrelevant, because Zanu PF will no longer be the governing party. We are forced to pick our battles. And knowing which is the front we want to fight and we should concentrate on is important. Because fighting a decoy and lose the real battle is not a clever move at all. We want to make sure that if 2028 elections are held, people do not participate in those flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. Deny Zanu PF legitimacy, they'll be forced into a new GNU, which will end up with the democratic reforms being implemented. Stopping Mnangagwa 2030 agenda, followed by participating in 2028 and giving Zanu PF legitimacy, is not a victory at all. That is what people must understand. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.